Money, bullets, oil, and cryptocurrency. This is Military Matters. This episode is brought to you by TektoGear, TektoGear.com, a Portland, Maine-based tactical knife company. The knives are created by the CNC process to provide the best precision, functionality, and beauty. The TektoGear knives won't cost a half month's rent either. Today, TektoGear is giving 15% off the entire purchase. Go to TektoGear.com. Use the discount code STRIPES. That's STRIPES. Go to TektoGear.com and use discount code STRIPES and save 15% off your entire purchase. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
Over the last couple of episodes, we've been talking about Russia's impact on Ukraine. The war continues, and according to reports as of this recording, there is still no discernible end in sight. During our future war segments on Russia, which very much became current war, we focused on the Russian military, the people, and the invasion. For this episode, we're going to widen the lens a bit and shift the focus from Russian war to Russian money, and the impact the war on Ukraine is having on a global scale. There are a lot of factors to consider when discussing economics, especially when you're discussing the economics of war. Some of you may be thinking, what does the price of tea in Moscow have to do with the American military? Well, everything really. As the war continues, sanctions take effect, money dries up in some places and pools in others. War is expensive, and everyone from the convenience store clerk in St. Petersburg, Russia, to the convenience store clerk in St. Petersburg, Florida, can feel the crunch of world economy strained by choking oil pipelines, inflation, and food shortages. Russia has the world's 11th largest economy, and since the war began, we've seen that economy take some major hits from both international sanctions and private companies simply switching off their services to Russian citizens. The Russian ruble plummeted, losing about 40% of its value against the dollar since the war began. There's also the issue of food. Russia and Ukraine comprise over 30% of the global trade on wheat. The war has devastated Ukrainian agriculture, which has turned farmland into battlefields. Considering 44 million people in 38 countries are living on the edge of famine, this rise in the cost of food could cause millions to die of starvation. Here in the U.S., where famine is unlikely to hit, we're still experiencing a sharp rise in food prices, not entirely because of the Russian-Ukraine war, but it's certainly not helping the nearly 9% increase in food here at home. Money squeeze, food squeeze, oil squeeze, all of these things can plunge a country and its people into desperate mindsets. There are far more ways to lose a war than there are to win it, and money is one way that opens those avenues to defeat. In this episode, Jack Murphy talks with commodities analyst Nick Trickett, who specializes in Russian commodities and acts as an oil and gas consultant. What exactly are the sanctions imposed on Russia doing? How will Russia's control of Europe's oil come into play? And is there any truth to the Russia-China relationship becoming stronger because of Western sanctions? Then after the break, we talk with cybersecurity and cryptocurrency expert Rick Jordan about the role cryptocurrency is playing in the Russian-Ukraine war. First, Jack Murphy and Nick Trickett talk oil, sanctions, and China.
So, Nick, like I said, a lot has happened since the last time we talked. I think when we initially came to this subject, it was still like maybe 3 weeks or something from the invasion. Now, here we are several months after the invasion of Ukraine. Again, there's a lot to unpack here, but what are your big takeaways right now? Where are you sitting at?
The first is that sanctions are working, and I think people have very unrealistic expectations as to like how sanctions are work in practice. And I don't understand why everyone thinks it's like an overnight like on-off switch. Like economies are big and complicated. I think we shouldn't dismiss their effectiveness, and I think that just as important, and not more important in some cases, is actually self-sanctioning. Companies aren't legally obligated to do what they're doing, but so many companies are leaving the country or suspending deliveries to like their subsidiaries in the country and so on, or suspending new investment, that it's a huge problem in the relatively short term, maybe not like in the first couple of weeks, months, but like within 3 months, it's very visible. And we're already seeing the impacts when it comes to Russians' attitudes about what's going on, even if it's hard to get a good picture of what Russian public opinion is because so many people are pollsters, et cetera. So that's the first one. I think the second one is also that it's pretty clear that they didn't achieve what they wanted to achieve in the timeline they wanted to achieve it on. I think it's probably premature to act like they're losing the conflict, because in reality, they can obviously still force a really unfavorable peace on Ukraine. And so I think it's important to temper expectations on that side of it. And similarly, the stuff that's getting hit hardest very quickly by these export bans on tech and so on are the highest end systems they have. They can still just haul artillery in and just pound places to death. And there's not a whole lot Ukraine could do to stop that from happening. So that's also, I think, part of the calculus as well. Though it's important to also note they've yet to mobilize all the conscripts like legally to kind of institute like a massive draft. The new conscript intake is pretty much like what you'd see annually around this time of year. So it doesn't yet point to like kind of national mobilization at the level they could mobilize if they wanted to. So I think that's the other thing I would lead with. And I guess the only other takeaway I can think of that might not be getting as much scrutiny is that I do think that the sanctions that have been imposed do significantly degrade Russia's war-making capacity, but it's the kind of thing where the way that they degrade it might not be direct, and it takes a fair amount of time. So obviously, like we've already seen the plant for like I'm forgetting the name of the tank model right now, but one of the highest end tank models they had have suspended operations because they can't get chips, et cetera, that they used to use for production. The better way to think about it, though, is that despite the kind of some like rally around the flag effect, it's hard to imagine conscripts are going to get really excited about killing their cousins in Ukraine when their families are like going broke, the cost of food is skyrocketing, et cetera. That kind of motivation can only last for so long. And it's pretty clear that the regime feels politically constrained because they're not trying to mobilize the entire economy and country yet to wage a kind of war to the finish in Ukraine.
I want to hit up like a few of the topics that are batted around in the media and on social media, also sometimes by some big brains who I don't think really know what they're talking about. Well, let's start off with the gas pipeline situation between Germany and Russia, and how that is going to affect the war. Does that give Russia leverage over the European Union? How do those dynamics play out as this war progresses?
The short answer to the question is, does it provide Russia leverage, is like literally yes, but it only provides leverage if the Europeans are not willing to take the damage, if they're not willing to take the risk of a shutoff. And the reality is that Germany has actually already launched planning procedures for a potential Russian cutoff of gas. So, it would be really painful. It would immediately trigger a recession in Europe. And I think the European economy is probably already in recession, but the Eurozone economy broadly. But it would definitely trigger like a deeper recession in Europe and be painful. You'd have industries throttling down production, et cetera, and some prices rising for things beyond your heating bills or your electricity bills. But I don't think it meaningfully gives Russia that much leverage. And you can see it, the fact that Gazprom has not cut off. The reality is that because of the way sanctions were constructed and the fact that the Russian central bank can no longer get dollars or euros from the European Central Bank or the Federal Reserve, basically, or really anyone, because obviously like any other central bank has to get that currency via those institutions, basically means that the only way that Russia can raise foreign currency reserves to backstop its currency is through its exports. And so now what's happening is the central bank imposed a rule that any exporter earning foreign currency has to convert 80% of that currency into rubles. So let's say you're an oil or gas company. The second you get your like $700 million a day or whatever it is in revenue and profits collectively, or revenues collectively, you have to put 80% of that into rubles immediately. And so that's actually really bad for you as an operator, because it means that those companies increasingly cannot borrow domestically in euros or dollars the way they might have before to finance longer term projects. Rubles are, the inflation is high, so that the value of the ruble is really unstable. And also the exchange rate that people keep citing with the ruble being stronger than before, it's a bit BS because they've imposed really intense capital controls. So people can't get money out of the country very easily, or money out of the bank very easily, or as easily. If you're a foreigner, you're having an impossible time selling your assets, or you're not allowed to pull your capital out of the country. And topping it all off, you have the fact that the actual liquidity, like the size of trades of people buying rubles in terms of the daily churn rate, is like really low. So basically, the value of the ruble doesn't tell us very much about the health of the Russian economy. It's actually a negative indicator in many respects. It's increasingly detached from what prices actually look like. And that doesn't matter as much for oil or gas company. It matters a lot for households because as much as 75% of the monetary value of consumer goods are imported in Russia, or was war prior to the conflict breaking out. So the point being that the energy companies are having a harder time actually financing their operations in a way that was sustainable and attractive, which has a knock-on effect of reducing investment and making it more expensive to borrow money to invest. Because the way that they got away with it before, managing the problem with the ruble was simply that when the ruble devalued, their actual relative earnings increased because they were earning dollars and euros. And so it didn't really, it was actually a net positive for them because their costs were in rubles, but their earnings were in foreign currency. And that's no longer helping them because of the new capital controls that are in place.
What do you think of these reports that they're trying to move to backing their currency in gold, that the rubles are going to be backed by gold again?
So that's BS. I think it's literally true in that since 2014, if you look at the size of gold share of their foreign currency reserves and versus the relative size of the expansion of the money supply, the expansion of the ruble's money supply since 2014 has been more gold backed than prior years. So that is a trend, but hard currency wouldn't make any sense. It would really tie their hands in terms of spending. So they wouldn't be able to run deficits really at all that they need to run in that kind of a scenario. And also you pegging it to gold really doesn't get you very much when you have capital controls because the capital controls are already playing the role of stabilizing the value of the currency. So there's no reason to then tie it to gold specifically. What gets even more complicated is that it's really easy to trace where gold is mined and produced. The U.S. Congress, for instance, could pass a bill, which has been threatened by Republicans, at least a couple, I think, in recent weeks, pass a bill just like sanctioning the purchases of Russian gold. And then suddenly they cannot convert that gold into anything abroad. So it becomes useless in terms of exchange abroad, and you have to exchange it domestically. The only way, and if you're exchanging it domestically, all that foreign currency you're raising is going to be from your exports anyway, which you're already getting and trying to manipulate with capital controls. So I think there's an element of truth to it in that they're trying to expand gold production and so on because Russia's a big gold producer, but it doesn't really make much sense economically. I don't think they're going to go that way. But to finish off the point about gas, basically, if Gazprom were to violate those contracts and force people to pay rubles, and they say no, et cetera, they then have to go to arbitration, and the arbitration court is going to award the European consumers tens of billions of dollars eventually when it gets settled, and that's the money that Gazprom is going to owe in foreign currency it doesn't have, and it's going to have to pay it if it wants any chance of being able to sell in those markets again. So Russia can't just unilaterally do that.
You recently wrote this article. I definitely recommend people take a look at it. It's called Russia's Toxic Relationship with Oil. And in it, you lay out a case. I'm sure I'm going to paraphrase it wrong, but I'll ask you to tell us about it, about how the sanctions may cause Russia to shut down oil wells, and economically, financially, it may not be feasible to even reopen them.
Yeah, that's correct. So the way to think about it is that sanctions that were not targeted at oil specifically. So the purchase of Russian oil was not itself sanctioned directly. What was sanctioned rather was the swift access for certain banks and what the central bank could do in Russia itself. And so actually most of what we're seeing in terms of the sanctions effect on oil is self-sanctioned. It's importers, refiners, and banks and insurance companies basically saying we don't want to touch Russian cargoes because it's high risk, it's volatile. We don't know if they're going to add more sanctions. They might change, the regulatory environment very quickly, et cetera. And also on top of that, because of the war, there's a much bigger reputational risk if you buy Russian crude. And the market was somewhat tight for supply, or very tight for supply. So there's definitely competition for barrels, but that's a factor as well. You saw that with Shell, where they bought Russian oil and were trading it, and immediately okay, we'll take all the profits and give it to Ukraine, to try to save face. But anyway, the basic point is that people are self-sanctioning and buying less of it. And so in March, the numbers hid the problem because you could still find tankers that you could store it at sea, which kind of buys you time. But people are now buying, the Euro blend is the main Russian export blend. There are a couple of us, but that's the main one. They're buying it at discounts of $30+ compared to Brent, which is the traditional benchmark for crude prices globally. So it's a huge discount, right? If let's say oil costs around $100 now, that they're getting it at 70 a barrel, and Russia has high production costs, compared to a lot of other producers it's competing against. But the reason why the well shut-ins matter is because they can't store crude oil. So Crude oil is already difficult to store. Like generally speaking, after about 6 months, it becomes less viscous, and so you have to move to market. If you leave it like in the kind of tank type facility, that's kind of why in the U.S., for instance, if you look at the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, we use salt caverns that have to be like injected regularly, et cetera. And when the oil comes back out after a long period of time, it's lower quality actually because salt's usually leached into it and other things have happened to it. So Russia lacks any of that storage capacity. It just didn't invest in it. Whereas like Saudi Arabia, for instance, has a fair amount of capacity to store barrels. And so every barrel they produce has to be sold to market. And once people abroad stop buying as much Russian oil for various reasons, and they can no longer find a place to put it at sea, the only thing they can do is reduce production. And when you start idling wells, you stop extracting from them. The longer they're idle, the higher the risk that the kind of cement casing that's used for the actual well itself breaks at some point, fractures at some point. And on top of that, it's worth noting that the more depleted an oil well becomes of the actual oil reserves that have been drilled on site, the more you have to pump in like water and chemicals to inject it to get the pressure in the wellhead high enough to be able to get the oil out of the ground.
One of the other ideas or narratives getting batted around out there is that American sanctions and support for the war for the Ukrainian side is pushing Russia closer to China. And that what's happening right now is that Russia and China are going to like somehow reorient their economies and create this like closed loop authoritarian market economy that bypasses the Western world. What are your thoughts about that notion?
I think the polite word for it is that like the way that I'd frame it, and don't get me wrong, they're still trading. It's also important to remember that like a lot of trade with Russia is not actually sanctioned directly. The financial sanctions are the same thing as actually directly sanctioning trade. But what we've actually seen is, for example, China is massively increasing its coal production now to reduce purchases of Russian coal and refusing Russian coal imports. And so you see those numbers starting to tick down steadily. Chinese state banks have been told not to extend letters of credit for various imports of Russian commodities. So like Chinese purchases of Russian commodities are falling. They're not like falling off a cliff, mind you, but they are falling. Like Chinese refiners are more hesitant about buying Russian crude. And so you'll see exceptions to that. Like you might have these privately owned, they're called teapot refiners, buying Russian crude cargoes at a discount. But in general, like Chinese imports of Russian oil are also falling, and there's really no scope for more investment. Chinese companies aren't rushing to the Russian market. Like Russian demand is taking a huge hit. Like you don't suddenly sink a bunch of money into a market that's going to contract in GDP terms at least 10% this year. I think almost definitely more, but that's the range we're talking about. And Huawei, I think as of today, is no longer selling to the Russian market. They just cut them off. So that's self-sanctioning. That's not like a sanctions measure per se, but they don't want to piss off the Europeans or the US and deny them market access or screw them more. Because everyone has to remember that China's biggest trade partners are the EU and the US. Like Russian trade is significant, but it's a tiny sliver compared to what they get out of Europe and the US. It's not really happening. So yeah, like China's going to keep buying Russian commodities where it can, as a large economy, but like the Chinese state has definitely done a lot to show that it's not trying to like totally undermine the sanctions regime or fuse those two economies into a dragon bear to like take on the West. That's not happening.
So over the last few weeks, we saw a lot of developments in Ukraine. Now people are anticipating regrouping and pushing from eastern Ukraine to completely take over the Donbas region, which we may see unfold here in the next couple of weeks. What do you see the diagnosis or prognosis for Russia going forward here? I think we've talked about a little bit, and we spoke a little bit about how they could fight a more sort of defensive war and just pound these areas with artillery. Russia has lost thousands of pieces of armored vehicles over there, hundreds of tanks, some reports 10,000 soldiers, maybe more. Are they running out of steam? Are they going to run out of resources, both human capital and economic resources to prosecute a war like this?
So human capital, no. I think that they can raise enough people. They can conscript enough people to keep fighting it, right? Literally speaking. And on top of that, you also have to remember that as the economy that goes from stagnation into like full on massive recession, people are also going to be desperate for resources for cash where they can get it. And so like working for the state's going to be one of the most secure ways to get that as like markets. I'm not going to call it full on free fall, but like that it's in some cases it'll be
depression.
Yeah, it'll be free fall. So that's, I think, an important factor of it. I think that I don't necessarily think there's a huge patriotic swell. We want to go fight in Ukraine going on by any stretch, but I do think they're going to be able to get manpower if they go that route and keep getting it in. They're going to try to avoid that if possible, because obviously it's much more politically risky for them. But that's possible. On the economic side, they can afford, like in a financial terms, they can literally afford it. I think people overstate the extent to which they rely on oil and gas. Like, it's really, really important to the fiscal system. But the reason why it's so important actually has more to do with the rest of the economy than it does the actual budget at this point. And even though it's really important for the budget, I don't see them running out of money to do it, because the value of the ruble is already like made up to some extent, or at least controlled. And they can't just print money if they really want to. They're going to try to avoid it because they don't want massive inflation, but they have options. I think the constraints are more unclear to me, and I think don't matter yet, but will in about a month's time, maybe a little bit after that, are about like logistics, right? Like, literally, if factories stop making rail wagons and they can't reserve enough capacity to move freight left and right, if European countries, like in Finland, they started rejecting like Russian commercial vehicles across the border, basically. So if that starts happening in other European countries and that those products have to get to market, then they can't move them via European ports, and they're going to have to go to Asia. And like, suddenly the logistics network in the country and the economy is overloaded, even despite falling demand for stuff domestically, because they just physically don't have the capacity to move all these flows in different directions when they need to return it off and on. And that's going to impact, their ability to like move kit from like Siberia, or wherever else it's located, wherever they want to move it from, to Ukraine proper, or to southern Russia, next to Ukraine, and European Russia next to Ukraine. So that, I think, is going to have an impact relatively quickly. I don't have a hard timeline because I don't have a lot of insight into this stuff, because open source only tells you so much. I probably have to prowl Telegram, and I've got a day job, so I don't have time for that. But that's something I think would matter logistically fairly quickly, but probably doesn't matter for this offensive yet. But I think it's fair to say that the next couple of weeks, like, there aren't any meaningful constraints aside from what they're willing to do in this offensive. The next one, whatever happens next, if there's like a consolidation phase, or if it's blunted and they get bogged down, then I think that like logistics question matters a lot more, and starts to be more evident in the way that they would go about operational planning. But I think at present they're basically trying to bet on the fact that the Ukrainian military has proven really adept at fighting defensively around cities and choke points, but is not really prepared for like maneuver once you get out of trenches or away from urban centers. And that's where Russia's advantage, I think, probably still persists. And that's kind of what I would assume they're trying to go for, given that Ukraine's like logistics and so on are being held together with baling wire at the moment. And they're just trying to move whatever they can to the front.
Any final thoughts on what we should expect in the next 4 weeks, or things that you think are being overlooked right now in the media?
I won't say that. So there are a couple of things that come to mind, as always. The first one, and this is not a big thing I think is being overlooked, so I don't think it's like the media's fault, but something to watch more of is what's happening in the deal-making space, both for LNG, but also for hydrogen, which is still a bit perspective. So I don't want to like overhype its ability to replace other sources of energy, but there has been like a rash of new deals in the last 6 months, even without the conflict, being pushed forward. And we're seeing kind of some projects that are commercial stage as a kind of pilot projects. And there's a huge world out there of hydrogen projects that were potential, not necessarily going to happen, but that were important to be negotiated. And Russia was going to try to take part in that process. And that's totally absent now. It's lost out on that. And that's going to matter more in places like Australia, where they're going to try to export it. And Germany wants to develop its own domestic capacity for it, et cetera. And that's like a big deal for metallurgy and for the industries that use natural gas in Europe in particular, that like we're most worried about when it comes to Russian dependence in terms of imports. So I'd watch that. I think another thing to watch that isn't fair, it's not really getting enough traction in the Western press, is just honestly just find people who are reading Russian economic news, like whatever's getting published, because for whatever reason, the way we talk about sanctions, we never actually talk about what the Russians are saying themselves about what's going on in the economy. And so it becomes this really weird like debate where like hawks, in various countries talk about how the sanctions aren't working fast enough. And they're not wrong about like us not bringing Russia to its knees immediately, but there's only so much you can do very quickly. And or others think that like the Biden administration has been soft, et cetera, because they want to paint the picture that like this wouldn't have happened under Trump, which is also a bit farcical. But regardless, the whole discussion about the effectiveness of sanctions and what's happening or how to slow down Russia, et cetera, is taking place without actually just looking at Russian business news. And it's terrible. So just any time you look at the new headlines, almost all the ideas are bad. I wrote a blog today, came out. I mentioned just one idea from a few weeks back. The Federal Anti-Monopoly Service wants to end all contracts that are denominated in foreign currencies on the domestic market, or else indexed to or priced by like a foreign currency denominated price index, like a commodity or something. And so that all the contracts have to be negotiated only using rubles as like the base. And the second you do that, you can't have long-term contracts anymore, because also the ruble is unstable in its value, like inflation's high, et cetera. So like businesses have warned that if it goes through, and I'm not saying it might not go through, but if it goes through, they'll have to trade and sell everything like on the spot. They cannot sign long-term contracts domestically. So that's going to be disastrous for like domestic planning. The stuff like that's going on right now. And that totally contradicts the narrative that like sanctions aren't working. So that's something I think is being unfortunately overlooked, because it's not as sexy, obviously. And understandably, the focus is on Ukraine itself, given atrocities that are happening there and the actual like daily grind, the conflict happening there. I guess the last one would what to look for the next 4 weeks. Let's say I expect a Russian offensive in Donbass to be more successful than the opening gambit, because they've had time. We don't really know a whole lot about how the Ukrainian military is doing, because they don't tell us anything. We only hear when they retake places. So we just literally don't know. And we don't yet have any evidence that the Ukrainian military can maneuver en masse in like open field kind of conflict settings, which is possible in Eastern Ukraine. Obviously, it depends on breakthroughs in the front and how units are positioned and so on. But that's possible and something to watch for, because I think in that context, Russia has more of an edge than when it's grinded out siege warfare in cities. And they're reliant on roads that can be easily ambushed, et cetera. And they don't really have the troops to occupy enough territory to secure all the routes well. So that's different. So that's something to look to, I think, to watch for. And I think that also that's going to be happening against the backdrop of like a worsening logistical and economic context in Russia. And so they're going to be more and more desperate to try to do what they can as fast as they can, but like acknowledging their own limitations, because they obviously don't want to have to mobilize the entire country for war footing.
When we return from the break, cybersecurity and cryptocurrency expert Rick Jordan and I talk Bitcoin, oligarchs, and a new crypto economy when we return. Ideal for fishing, especially if one needs to quickly cut a line, the Romeo folding knife comes with a light carbon fiber handle with an amazing grip and a D2 steel blade. Fair warning, the blade is extremely sharp and cuts through the toughest materials. What makes it simple is the flipper tab. The knife pops open for quick use all in one single motion. Go to tektogear.com today. TektoGear is giving 15% off the entire purchase. Use discount code STRIPES. That's STRIPES. Go to tektogear.com and use discount code STRIPES and save 15% off your entire purchase. Despite the Russia-Ukraine war dominating headlines, you might have heard some rumblings about another topic that you might be surprised to know is also tied to the war, and that's cryptocurrency. Much the same way we call tissue paper Kleenex, which is a brand name, lots of people think of cryptocurrency as simply Bitcoin, which is actually a kind of cryptocurrency. This is always something of a difficult topic to tackle because there are still so many people who simply don't understand what cryptocurrency is, what the blockchain is, or even what exactly is a Bitcoin. We're not going to go into the weeds of how cryptocurrency works. That's another episode perhaps, and there are folks out there who've explained it better than I could. If you want a more detailed explanation, I'd suggest going on YouTube and searching what is cryptocurrency or what is a Bitcoin, and go down that YouTube rabbit hole. For the sake of the following conversation, I'll preface by saying this. Cryptocurrency is not a made-up thing. It's as tangible as your checking account or your credit score. It's digital, sure, but so is your signature if you're using a CAT card. Cryptocurrency is very real, and it has a very real value. But it's also very volatile, which makes it a very risky investment tool, but also one that can be quite lucrative. Cryptocurrency exchange and purchase can range from semi-private, which means you can see how much was transacted from one wallet to another with no names attached, to a very private transaction, in which some cases there's almost no trace of the transaction. Cryptocurrency, often referred to simply as crypto, began to gain the attention of law enforcement and the intelligence community several years ago after digital black market sites on the dark web were taken down by international law enforcement agencies for selling everything from drugs and guns to assassins for hire. Cryptocurrency has even been used by terrorist organizations to raise funds. The currency of choice has often been Bitcoin, and this may be how you currently think of crypto transactions, for nefarious purposes. But crypto is more than just the currency of choice for illegal operations. It's something way bigger, and it's begun to change the face of world economies. Last November, Bitcoin hit its all-time high of $68,000 a coin after a year of rising value and interest in crypto from governments and long-standing financial institutions. Then, all great parties, it had to come to an end as values dropped to the 46,000s from 68. But the price drop has done little to deter investors and governments. With crypto readily available to the public to purchase and trade via an app on your phone, what was once a complex, hard-to-purchase digital currency is now as easily purchased as a DoorDash dinner. But what does this somewhat new interest in crypto have to do with war, Russia, and the world economy? Cybersecurity and cryptocurrency expert Rick Jordan helps explain.
Yeah, it's intriguing, man, what's going on in that section of the world right now. Because the Ukraine, these are things that you can verify even on NASDAQ.com. But the last number that I looked was that Russia transacts something like, it's multiple double digits and billions of crypto a year, whether it's Bitcoin or something else. And the last stat that I saw was it was around 11.2% of the entire world's Bitcoin transactions all happens in Russia with the miners that they have there. And my thought wheels just start going. It's because the hidden cost of crypto is energy. And Russia's entire economy is built on energy, whether it's gas or meaning like natural gas or oil, that's what they heavily lean on. And now, years ago, they built this entire power grid in the Ukraine, in essence, back when it was the former Soviet Union. And it's ironic that the Ukraine just started to say, hey, we're doubling down on Bitcoin. This was even before the invasion. That's what they see the future of their economy being. They really just put everything into cryptocurrency and said, this is what we're going to do. And this is how we're going to use the surplus energy resources that we have on our power grid in order to transact crypto. So imagine, if you will, now this is the part where I say it's just theory. Imagine, if you will, that Russia already has well over 1/10 of the entire world's crypto transactions. Bitcoin transactions alone is 11.2%, but it goes beyond that because of their energy resources. There's a lot of data centers that exist in Russia. There's even a lot of, prior to the sanctions, there's a lot of American companies that had server farms in Russia just because it was less expensive there because of their extensive natural resources that they have in their power grid. And now we have this invasion that's taking place. What if, now this is just hypothesis, what if, because of how Ukraine has doubled down on Bitcoin processing and crypto transactions and just overall adoptance of cryptocurrency as a whole, and they have an energy surplus, an electrical nuclear power grid surplus of around 50%. I see a natural resource that could be a pretty easy target for Russia to ingest. Now, again, that's just my theory, but that's just the part that no mainstream media is talking about. No mainstream media is really talking about the cryptocurrency side of what's going on, with the exception that Ukraine has a lot of donations coming in right now. A lot of donations, millions of dollars coming in crypto. They publish their wallet address out to Twitter and a bunch of other places, and it's a pretty cool way to get money in there, especially with all the difficulties that they're having connecting to the rest of the world right now. Thank God for Elon Musk and Starlink right now as well, for putting that in place for them to allow them to still have connectivity to the rest of the world during these trying times. And that so far is just so intriguing to me. What's the real motivation behind this, and why isn't mainstream media talking about the effect that crypto might have on this war that was started? Because right now, from what I see anyways, we have Putin who is giving all these very vague reasons for what he's doing. The special military operation, those are phrases that he's using. He's saying that there's just a corrupt government in place, but that it's just a danger to Russia itself. Ukraine is a danger to Russia itself, but there's really no finger on any specific reason that I can see. And coming out of 2021, you're right. That was, in essence, the year of crypto. We saw Bitcoin skyrocket, absolutely skyrocket. And now going into 2022, we've seen it dump, the entire crypto market, actually, because of different regulations that we've seen proposed by the United States, European nations. I think crypto scares a lot of people, Rod, just because there's no control on it right now. It is completely decentralized. And there's this mysticism behind it that is completely untraceable too, which actually is a lie, because there's this interchange. Maybe I should just stop for a second and let you ask some questions because I just said a lot of things, but there's other thoughts that I have around how the technology works and where I see it going, and really just busting a lot of myths for people too.
What is this, with all these sanctions and whatnot, what does crypto now mean to these oligarchs of whom there's an international effort to capture their assets?
Russia was taken out of the SWIFT system for most banks, right? They have large banks that are there, and the SWIFT system, for anybody that doesn't understand what that is, that's been in place between almost every single country that exists right now as a way to transfer money from one to another. Think of a wire transfer in the US, it's instantaneous, but the SWIFT system allows you to connect with national banks in other countries and send money to anybody worldwide. And so think about that almost like a PayPal, right? But that's the SWIFT system for wire transfers. It's been around for decades. It's been the best way to move large amounts of money from one person to another, from a corporation to a corporation internationally. Now you have the Russian oligarchs that you've been talking about, and Russia's been removed from the SWIFT system. And I know even Coinbase, as part of these sanctions, started blocking the wallet address of some of these Russian oligarchs. And what that means, wallet addresses, it's almost, think of a PayPal thing, right? Or a Venmo. Everybody has a username that's on Venmo or PayPal or the Cash App so that you can send money from one person to another. Crypto has wallet addresses, and it's a huge string of numbers and letters that just says, here's how you get money to me. This is my username, whether it's on the Ethereum network, the Binance network, however you're going to send money or crypto from one person to another, or from a wallet to a wallet. These wallets have addresses just like you have a PayPal username. That's the best way and easiest way I could explain it. And Coinbase has now blocked these from the Russian oligarchs. However, that just means that they can't transact on Coinbase, one of the largest exchanges that exists in the United States here. The Russian oligarchs just cannot transact on Coinbase. They can still send and receive money all the live long day from their private wallet address. And this happens all the time. You can go straight from wallet to wallet, and it completely bypasses any sort of system that's in place. That's the whole point of crypto, is that it's decentralized. Whereas Coinbase almost centralizes the decentralization by having what's called a custodial wallet. So they actually have full control over those wallet addresses. If you have money that's in Coinbase, it's actually not private to you. If you have crypto that's in Coinbase, it's actually not completely private and secure to you, versus a non-custodial wallet, which means you have it in your possession. Nobody else can access it. You can send money to it, send money out of it, send money to one person, receive money from another person from another wallet address. That's the beauty, at least how it was fantasized about crypto. And that's how the Russian oligarchs are still able to transfer money in and out. So the prevalence of crypto now has just been overly accentuated, because this is a way to still move money, or in the form of crypto anyways, in and out of the country of Russia to other parts of the world. Anybody can do this. Any human being can do this, and that's part of what they're doing now. It's strange to me because you see that Bitcoin took a tumble at this point, but I think that's just because of world issues right now with the war that's going on. I remember there's a brand new coin that's out there called Catcoin. You talked about Shiba Inu a little bit ago, right? I invested some money in Catcoin. In the matter of 48 hours after I put just $3,000 into it, it was worth $60,000. because it was starting to rise up. They're looking at this as the new competitor to Shiba. It's built on the Binance network instead of the Ethereum network. It can have amazing apps that are built upon it, decentralized apps, which Shiba Inu can't. There's some limits with that. So they think that this is the next up and coming one. And I saw some amazing gains, but just like everything else, literally everything else, including Bitcoin right now, as soon as that first missile hits a couple of weeks ago, everything tanked. Absolutely everything tanked. So just like the stock market, just like any economy, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. And the thing to always remember about crypto is that it's extremely volatile. The only reason it's worth what it is because people put money into it. So the more money that's in the bucket, think about just dumping a bunch of cash into a bucket. This is the same way, similar anyways, at least to certain public companies. There's this thing called a fully liquidated market cap. It's literally the amount of money that's in that bucket. So if everybody took their money out, it's divided evenly across every single person. This is the same with Bitcoin, same with Ethereum. There's a fully diluted market cap. They can pull the cash out. So when people keep pulling the cash out and taking out their, if you want to call them gains, losses, whatever you want, they're just pulling out what's theirs from this bucket. It decreases the amount available for everybody else, so the price goes down. The more people that are in it, the price goes up because there's literally more money that's sitting there in that bucket. But now, always, just like the stock market crash, the crypto market crashes at the same time there's any unrest globally. And this is a big destabilization that's going on, obviously, with Russia and Ukraine. And people are getting scared. So they start to put their money into what they call more stable investments. And there's even stable coins that are out there. There's Tether that's completely tied to the US dollar that stays right there at $1. It's still crypto, but it's always worth the same amount that the US dollar is. Those are stable. People used to do gold, silver, those kinds of things, and call them a little bit more stable investments. That's what individuals are doing right now, is pulling their money out of the crypto markets and putting them into more stable investments or stuffing it under their mattress.
We turned the ruble upside down. Every company has gone in there. If Google Pay can shut down your ability to get to work because that's what you use to get on the subway, isn't cryptocurrency a way to circumvent these types of international crises? Like, had a Russian citizen had their Bitcoin in their wallet, would they have been able to turn that into liquid cash? Could they have used that if there had been a bigger adoption of cryptocurrency to use your Bitcoin instead of a Google Pay account? They still would have been able to get to work. Life might not have taken such a hard toll. Is that a fair assessment?
It is a fair assessment. And that's, I think, where the world is heading at this point. There's more and more just everyday places. If you're talking like subway transit or McDonald's, even for that matter, there's different establishments that are currently taking cryptocurrency as a form of payments. It's not widely adopted yet. And I saw there was even a new restaurant chain. I can't remember the name of it, but their primary form of payment is going to be Shiba Inu. And it's a 70 store restaurant chain. I think it's overseas. I can't even remember. The Shiba Inu community was super excited about that because it shows a real life use case for what's going on in the world, which means more people are going to put money into it. The price increases just because you're able to transact with it, more adoption, more money goes into it. It's a great cycle to raise it. But to your point of the ability to still transact with Google Pay or even Apple Pay shutting down the entire country of Russia, yeah, you can still do that. However, worldwide adoption of crypto payments to do everyday things is still not where it needs to be in order to continue to live life just from your crypto wallet. We're not at that point yet.
The issue with cryptocurrency, and this is a thing that I saw with the rise of Shiba Inu, is it an investment or is it currency?
You got it. Yep.
I've had this discussion with several folks who are very skeptical about cryptocurrency, and their point is valid in that you can't spend an investment. You shouldn't spend an investment. It contradicts the point of investing. So you wouldn't go buy a stock. You wouldn't go buy $1,000 worth of Apple stock and then expect to spend 0.008 on something that you would buy at Best Buy and 0.006 of something.
For sure.
because otherwise you're destroying your investment and you're not going to get your ROI. Plus, the volatility of a stock is still it's still a volatile instrument. And compared
those
to
that buy stock, even in my public company, I'll reach out. They can't use that for currency anywhere.
Exactly.
It's an investment, and it's not even like it's store credit. Like you're putting it on tabs that cannot be converted to even use for services that Reach Out provides. It's just there. They have shares. Yeah.
And then if you look at crypto, is quite the opposite. You can buy Bitcoin as an investment, but you can also purchase things at like Newegg. I believe you can even, at some point, I think you could have bought a Tesla. I don't know if they're still doing that or not.
Yeah.
But you can buy things. You can buy a house. I've read stories about people buying cars and houses and actual items, tangibles with Bitcoin. So that does leave does leave the question up in the air of whether or not this is an investment or currency.
This is why Warren Buffett was against it for so long too. And finally, Berkshire Hathaway just put a large investment into I can't remember what it was, if it was an exchange or if it's a bank that's dealing with crypto or something like that. But your point is exactly what his was, is that it's still, he feels that it's still cash, it's still currency, but it's something you can't even touch. It's just out there in the air.
U.S. President Joe Biden signed an executive order calling on the government to examine the risks and benefit of cryptocurrencies. He laid out 6 key areas: consumer protection, financial stability, illicit activity, U.S. competitiveness, financial inclusion, and responsible innovation. But he also wants to explore a digital version of the dollar. Tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are on on the U.S. interest in a digital version of the dollar.
Yeah, we have a lot of we have a lot of ways to go. So I think that it's great. So executive orders like this that I see, they're more of this is completely my opinion. And things like this, to where it's like, hey, I want people to explore this, and this is my executive order. Until something actually happens and there's action taken, it's more fluff than anything else. We've seen with this administration and the previous one too, that executive orders don't necessarily mean as much as they used to. And that's my political stance for you. But the feds have been talking about this for years, though, way prior to President Biden's executive order, way prior to that they're looking to adopt a digital dollar, or potentially anyways, because China has a digital currency already. The dollar actually accounts for around 59% of global currency reserves right now, which is insane to me. Again, that's the US dollar. So even with what's going on with Russia at the moment, a lot of their reserves were actually in the US dollar, and now they can't move it around because they're removed from the SWIFT system. So the US dollar is still over half of the entire world's global currency reserves. That's crazy, man, because everyone still looks at the United States as almost like this stability point for currency. So if we can at least try to lead the way, or maybe catch up to China a little bit, the digital dollar could have really good potential impacts. And I know one of those was based on fraud. One of the points of President Biden's executive order was based on fraud. If this were to happen, it could hopefully reduce that, because of how blockchain happens right now. Everyone thinks that it's elusive and hard to trace and everything. There's ways to trace it, man. I can go out there and see exactly how many people hold Shiba Inu right now. You can do a wallet scan and you can actually see how many people hold that. You can even drill in on one of those wallets and see how much is in there. Because it's decentralized, a lot more information is made public. You can't necessarily siphon money out of there unless you have some really advanced techniques to actually get into that wallet and the passphrases and everything else. But if a digital dollar happens, what happens to those global currency reserves, 59% that other countries have right now for the currency reserves in the US dollar? How would that affect the value of the dollar? I have no idea, because this is so new at this point. But changing the dollar to digital, completely digital US dollar, has been a conversation now for years. I don't know if we'll see it adopt anytime soon, because if you have to change over what half the world is doing with their currency reserves, that's going to take a lot greater adoption and a lot more time than just signing an executive order.
What are some subjects and what are some topics here that, or I should say talking points and discussions that we are not talking about that we should be?
So energy is probably one of the biggest ones. Is that, coming back to the beginning of our conversation, Russia's entire economy is built upon energy. And when they transact a lot of the world's crypto, the way that works for everyone listening is that there's a miner, really brief. The miner is actually the one, if you want to move your crypto from your wallet to your friend Joe's wallet down the street, it has to go through a miner or a series of miners. That's just a computer that actually processes these math transactions, or a bunch of computers that process these math transactions. And the ones that complete it first actually receive a reward. It's almost like a tax on the actual transaction. It's a fee, so to speak. So if you transfer from one person to another, PayPal, for example, yeah, it's free, but if you do it via credit card, they charge 2% or whatever it is. It's like that kind of fee is what a miner actually gets. Somebody who owns this miner receives in the form of that cryptocurrency. So, but these miners are plugged into walls for the easiest ways to put it, and use energy. Bitcoin uses some of the world's highest energy resources in order to process all the transactions that happen, whether they're in and out of Bitcoin, converting it from the dollar or any other, or even the ruble for that matter, into Bitcoin, uses these miners, which use electricity because they're plugged into the wall. And there's other, like Ethereum version 2 is supposed to be using less energy right now, but it's one of the biggest world's energy and natural resource drains is processing cryptocurrency. That's really the hidden cost of something like this. And there's been a lot of movement from China, especially over to the United States, because China started to ban a lot of this, a lot of crypto, a lot of transaction, a lot of miners. And the United States has become a place of safe haven now because of the cost of power here is less to process these things in some other countries. Now, to your point, Rod, South Africa, that's popping up crypto farms, data centers that have pennies on the dollar energy usage that's there. And that's where people will continue to move. And that's what I feel that the Ukraine wanted too. If we tie it back to current events, is they had this surplus, and we're hoping to attract this kind of natural resources kind of economy using crypto because they have this entire energy surplus that's just there. It's just not being used right now. That's one of the biggest both concerns and one of the biggest economic maybe upticks that I can see over the next several years too, is where these farms will crop up, and we'll see a lot of miners move from one country to another country as the global energy market starts to shift. You know, with crypto in general, some of the concerns that I have to do with lost wallets, with burn wallets, because it's very easy to have a computer. Like I've got a couple of crypto wallets that are in what's called a hot wallet, so you can live trade those. And there's cold wallets that are completely offline. Those are the ones that, you know, are on a portable hard drive or a portable USB flash drive. Some of the problems I see with those is that, yeah, they can be lost. You've heard the story about somebody with 400 million in Bitcoin whose hard drive got in the bottom of a dump, and he's trying to pay people up to $20 million to go search for this hard drive for him because it has his Bitcoin wallet on there from years ago. You know, it's so easy to lose those cold wallets, or something happens, a flash drive goes bad, because yes, they do go bad. In my industry, everyone used to think that, oh, we can back up our files to a flash drive and then that's where they're at, but then the flash drive goes bad. So there still has to be a better way to hold these things. And I think we'll see those over the next coming years too, is different types of wallets, some that I can't even imagine right now, man. Some that I cannot even imagine, almost like cloud service kind of wallets, to where I would love to see someone who has a non-custodial cloud service wallet to where you own it, and they have all these redundancies that are in place to where you can even walk into this place and pick it up if you wanted to and move it from place to place, almost a safety deposit box at a bank, going the physical route again. That's something, if we can digitize that and put it into the crypto world, would be so amazingly freaking cool. So if there's someone listening right now, Rod, that can take this idea and run, just give me like a 1% commission, okay, for the idea or royalty on this. I'd love it. But there's concerns with crypto. There's benefits with crypto going forward. The next 5 years will play out so interesting. In the meantime, I think we're still going to see a lot of volatility with it, especially as world events unfold. I personally think that we're going to see a little bit more of a bearish market, if you want to look at that, until certain things start to take hold a little more and more people start to put money into this, because it's just a bucket, man. That's all it is. The more people put into it, the more it's worth.
Dollars, rubles, barrels of oil, or cryptocurrency. Money is the real fuel of war. Money is a large part of why the United States currently stands head and shoulders above everyone else in the great power competition. We can afford not only the best tech and equipment, but to also train our warfighters, volunteers, unlike conscripts, in a military that, despite its faults, takes probably the best care of its service members than any other nation on the planet. Our military is professional. We pay our service members with benefits and salaries. And when we go to war, we do so backed with a heavy defense budget. Aside from defense spending, there is a lot to be said about the state of the world economy, how tied we are to each other, how a war 1,000 miles away in Europe could increase the price of your grocery bill, push a region into famine, or open thousands of square miles of natural resources to another nation's energy needs. For years, experts have warned that the next wars could be over fresh water and other valuable resources such as the rare metals that make up your cell phone and other electronics. War and money will continue to dominate the headlines, and we'll be here to help you sort out what matters. This is Military Matters. I want to thank our guests Nick Trickett and Rick Jordan. You can find their links in the show notes. Don't forget to go to stripes.com, use promo code podcast, and get 50% off your digital subscription to Stars and Stripes online. Go to stripes.com, use promo code podcast, and get 50% off your digital subscription. I'm Rob Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
And we'll see you at the next episode. This episode is brought to you by Tektogear, TEKTOGEAR.com, a Portland, Maine-based tactical knife company. The knives are created by the CNC process to provide the best precision, functionality, and beauty. The Tektogear knives won't cost you half a month's rent either. Today, Tektogear is giving 15% off the entire purchase. Go to TEKTOGEAR.com. Use discount code STRIPES. That's STRIPES. Go to Tektogear.com and use discount code STRIPES and save 15% off your entire purchase.